Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to do lesson one, which is going to cover TDD and unit testing in Laravel. In particular, we're going to cover how to verify validations. With the TDD, we're going to start with writing test cases and then write the minimum code necessary to pass those tests and refactor as necessary. Okay, let's go and get started by creating a new project. And I'm going to start up Visual Studio Code. And before we start writing some code, just to show you some of the areas where you can access what comes out of the box, is Laravel uses PHP unit. So you see there's a PHP unit.xml file, and this has various information about what makes up the test suite. So you see by default, you get a test.php in both a unit and a features folder. So if we go to test, we'll see there's feature and unit. So in there is where you can start to put, and you could create other folders, but these are the ones that come out of the box, where you start to put your test cases. Feature is meant to be an entire feature, meaning it's like a route call or an API call. And so it's testing all the layers from the request to the response. While unit, which is not really used as much in my experience, is where you're testing a very specific class or method on a class. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some setup in the project so that I can access the database later. So I'm going to go ahead to my environment file, and I'm going to change the database. And so you want to create this database. I already have it created. So I'm going to create a test tutorial, the database name, I'm going to update the connection. Now we're going to, as we said, we'll start with creating the test case. So before we have any code in this project, first thing we're going to do is create the test case. So there's a artisan command for that. We're going to work with a product, so I'll call it product test. Traditional to name it whatever the class probably is or the feature, and then the test is part of how PHP unit knows that this is a test class. And where that got deposited is under feature. We see now we have this file that got created as part of that command, product test. And you see it extends test case, which is a base class. So it's using inheritance there. So it inherits all the features of that, which gives us a lot of different things that we'll see as we start to go. They create a boilerplate unit test already, which tries to assert calling the path, the route of just the main route, and then it asserts it gets back at 200. So we're not going to need that one. We're going to write our own. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And the first thing we would need to know is what are the requirements? So what is it that we're required to do before we write any code? So what we're going to do is we're going to deal with products. And the attributes of the products will be the name of the product, its price, and a model number. Some additional rules is all three fields are required. price must be greater than 0, and model number must be unique. So you can't have duplicates of that. So with those requirements, now we could start to think about what tests we need to write, and then we'll start writing the code to fulfill that. So let's start with the beginning. We'll do a public function. And with the naming convention here, by starting the test function, the function name with test, it understands that this is a unit test. So it uses naming over configuration here to know. So the class name ends with test, and the function names start with test. And then you see I have it named with uppercase for each word in the name of the test. And you try to give it a meaningful name. Don't worry about being short. You want to be descriptive, and it'll understand that each capital letter is a new word. So let's start writing this here. So first thing we're going to need is we're going to have to submit some data as part of the request. I'm going to just make an empty array. Something I should mention here is when you're thinking about a test, there's really 3 things you're doing. You're arranging something, so you're getting some setup done. And you're doing some action, so you're acting upon now the application to do something with that data. And then the last thing is you're asserting what you expected. So if you think about arrange, act, assert, it really helps you keep organized in how you write your test case. So here, what I'm really doing is I'm just arranging what's the input data. And then the act will be actually calling a route. And you see with this, when I hit this, all these things pop up. That's because I'm inheriting from test case class. So I get all these things as part of inheritance. So what we want to do is we're going to do a JSON submission. And the parameters it needs is it needs to know the method, which this will be a post because we're going to try to create a new product with this route. And then I'm going to use a route helper here to just get to my route with a named route as opposed to putting it with slashes. Then I'm going to pass the data with it. And what do I want to assert? Well, I'm going to deal with the response. And there's lots of things we can assert here on the response. So I'll do a couple for this first test. So first thing I'm going to assert, look at all these different assertions. So you can look up help in the documentation on what all these asserts are about. The one we're going to start with is a very basic one, which just asserts the response code, what status we got. And I'm expecting to get a 422, which is the status code, meaning the server understood the request, it got the request, but something's wrong with what you submitted, which in this case, I have no input. And these fields are going to be required. So this should really fail, and I should get a status of 422. Next thing I want to assert that the JSON has validation errors. So this takes an array of the errors I expect to get back when I submit no data inside my array here. So what are the things that should happen? Well, the first thing we said is that there's 3 fields and all of them are required. So let's start with that part. So now this takes an array of name value pairs. So we said when name is one of the fields. And the error I should get is name field is required. Next we have the price. And that says the model number. And these are the default messages you get back when you do Laravel validation. There are ways to override this, but we'll just start with the basics of what it gives you without any configuration. All right. So now I got my data. I'm arranging it. This is my input into the request that I'm going to put in, which has nothing in it, where it really should have the required fields. So it's going to fail on that. And then I'm submitting it with a JSON post to the route product store, and I'm submitting the data. And then my response, I expect a certain status code, and I expect certain errors to come back. So that said, now we can start to run it, which we have no code, but being TDD enthusiasts here, we're going to start with this and slowly build up all the functionality that's necessary to get it working. So first we'll do PHP artisan test. And you'll see that the example passed because I didn't delete that file. So that's this file over here, which already had a test case in it. We don't need this, so I'm going to delete this. And then we see ours failed, and it says that route product store, right here, doesn't exist. So that means it did this, it's fine with that. And when it got to this line, it failed right away because I have a route that doesn't exist. So this is where we start to build the code. So where do the route goes? Well, we'll put it in the web API file. The web file, we'll just put it in here. Take out this default route. Put what controller method we want to hit. We're going to give our name. Okay, so now we took care of what it told us, which is product store is not defined. Now product store route is defined. Run it again. Of course, we fail again. And we got code 422, but received 500. Now, 500 is a general server response error, not very meaningful, not very intuitive what that is. So fortunately, there's some help we get built in to help us actually see the underlying error, not the masked error, which is just a general catch-all 500. So how do we see the exact error that we want to see? You can use this code here to temporarily disable the error handling that's by default. And this will probably eventually come out. It's just to help us while we're still building up this test to getting to passing. That's how I like to use it. Okay, so let's run it again. Another error. And this one tells us a more meaningful message than the 500 errors. It tells us that the product controller doesn't exist, which makes sense because we put product controller here, but we didn't define it. So we need to create that. We'll do a PHP artisan command there. And with it, yeah, I think that's good. We'll just go with just creating the controller. So now the controller is created, and that got put under the app. HTTP controllers, and here's a product controller. So that's what that command did for us. So now let's run the test again. Fail again. Reason now is it tells us, okay, you got the class, but you don't have the method. So there's no store method. So now we know we need to come here. We'll start with just assuming there's no validation. Let's just create the minimum here. Import this class. That's our model. Okay, class not found. So we didn't create the model yet, so we need to do that. So that's another artisan command. And with it, I'm going to add the M flag so we get a migration, because we're going to also need to create the script to create the database table. So I added two things. We got our product controller already. And if we go down to here, we have our product class, which is our model that I was looking for in that error. And then under databases, we have our migration, which is this one here. So we can run the test now just to see where we're at. And it's telling us that it doesn't find app HTTP controller product not found. Now we created product, but by default, let's see what it brought in. Yeah, so it's not imported. See, it's still underlined. So now we can import it. We created it, but we didn't import it. So that should fix that one. See what we have next. Okay, now it's giving us an error that the name doesn't have a default value. So it's actually trying to do the insert on this line, but we didn't even create the fields, and the fields don't have a default value. So what we're going to do here is start to add our validation. And even before we do that, I think I'll actually update the database script for the migration. So let's do that first. Let's come in here and add the three fields. Okay, so let's run it again. And see, now it's having the issue because name doesn't have a default value. When we defined it, we don't have a default value. And it's also having issues, I think, with our model not telling that we can do mass updates. So I believe the next step will be to add where we can actually update the model fields. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and add the mass filled fields here. So what's fillable? Which is an array of field names. All name, price, model, fillable. See what we get now. Okay, we're still getting the same error. So even though we're filling in some plumbing, we're missing something here. And what we're missing here is we need to use a trait on our test class to know that we're updating a database. So let's go to our product test here. And at the highest level, we're going to use a trait use refresh database. What that does is it'll actually run our script so it'll understand the table structure and also clear out the database with each test run. So this is a really great feature that saves you a lot of manual mocking that would have normally taken place in other frameworks. So really great feature that Laravel has available. Okay, so now it's giving us error message that field name doesn't have a default value. So I think we need to enter validation now so we could try to get the custom errors we're expecting as opposed to these errors, because it's hitting the database and it really won't accept those values because there is none. So it's giving us a generic database level error. So let's go ahead and start adding our validation in our controller. So that error is not exactly intuitive. You kind of got to read into what it's doing under the hood. So just to review it again, we're coming to the request. We have an empty array of input on the request. We're using that input to do a create of a product. When it tries to do that, the database itself, based on our script, doesn't allow nullable. It doesn't have a default value for name, so it chokes at that point. So to circumvent that, we want to do our validation before we create. So let's go ahead and add some validation in. This takes an array of the validations we want to do. And so now if we think back to our requirements, what do we have? We have name required, price. We'll start with just one rule now. We'll work on others later. Is required. We'll start with just this from this test. And we're going to write just enough code to pass the test, not get ahead of ourselves and worry about all the validations at once for the required part. Okay, so let's try it now. Okay, we're getting the given data was invalid. Again, a high-level message, not the message we're exactly looking for. Doesn't exactly tell you where to go here, but what I'm thinking is if we go back to the product test, we have this exception handling, which is kind of masking what we want to see. Let's take that line out and see if it makes a difference. And if we start to get back what we expect here as opposed to this generic, the given data was invalid, we're not looking for that. We're looking for specific errors on name, price, and model. So I think this line was getting in the way and not letting the error handling we want bubble up to our response. Let's see if that solves it. Okay, looks good. We actually passed our test. So now we have a passing test. Excellent. So you see we wrote just enough code to pass the test. We did our model, we did our controller, we did just the method, just the route we needed, just the migration we needed to get things done. But we're not done yet, because if we go back up here to the top, we just took care of this one. So we're passing this test. But also price must be greater than 0. So let's work on another test to do that now. And really this test is not too much different than this one. So I'm going to borrow this and this and this, just take it all as a copy, and we'll tweak it. Here we need data because we're trying to check if something's greater than 0. So let's give it a name, hammer. So what we're going to be checking a very specific case, which is 0, which is not a valid price according to our requirements. Model number. And then we're going to do the same, calling the same route with the same data. We should get the same issue, but now we should get a different message. We shouldn't worry about this one. We give a valid one. And we shouldn't worry about this one because we give a valid model number. The price should be a different error, which I'm not sure the exact wording of it. Let's just try what I think it'll be. Must be greater than 0. If we get this wrong, I almost want to get it wrong because I want you to see how you can verify the output against what you are asserting versus the expected versus the actual. So even if I put an error here just to make sure it's wrong. We expect we always fail when we start. So we expected 422, but we got 201. So I was expecting 422 when this call got posted, and the response should have had a status code of 422, but instead it has 201, which is success. And the reason is that because we wrote the test, but we didn't change the validation. So that tells me I got to go back to the product controller and add more validation on the price. So I have to put, not only is it required, but it's an integer, and we'll do greater than 0. So now I added the actual business logic. Run it again. This time I failed on something I expected because I put this X, which is not the exact verbiage for that error message, but it's showing me that the error message that I did return was the price must be greater than 0. So it's not the word 0, it's the number 0 and no X. So I'll go fix my test to reflect what it's doing. Like that. Now they passed. Now, if you notice, there's still this other test in the unit one. Let's get rid of that too, because that's not real. I'll delete this file just because it's just noise. And now we have 2 passing tests. So if we go back to our requirements, we took care of this one. That's when the model number must be unique. I'm going to copy this again as boilerplate. We'll go to our third test case. Okay, so this one I'm going to go with that. Price, we can leave all that the same is fine. This is good. And then our response. Well, this one, we won't get a bad error code on the first one. It should just work. So I'm not worried about asserting this just yet. Let's do a different assertion to start. Let's first start with asserting that the database has. So we'll show a new type of assertion you could do. So if you go to the, again, this, which means we're now tapping into methods we inherit from the base class of test class, right? So we come in here and we'll go this, and there's assert database has. Now I can insert, it takes 2 parameters, which is the table name, so it's products. And then what am I trying to assert? That the data exists. So I'm going to use the same data I passed into the route here, this data here that I passed in here, which should have created a record in the database. Now I'm going to verify that there's a matching record found in the database. So that's my way of asserting that the first one worked, which also handles the test case of just creating a product is when all the data is valid. So that kind of covers that one as well. So a test case can cover more than one thing. The other thing I can assert is that it worked properly. So now I'm going to try to insert it again. So actually I can just do this exact call again. Really, it's the same thing. I'm going to do a second insert with the same exact data, which should now fail because I don't want duplicate model numbers. So I just inserted 124 on this line over here. So now when I do this line and I'm inserting a second product with the exact same data, I expect that to fail. So I should get back again a failed code, status code, but now the error will be something different, something like this. I will run that one and we'll expect it to fail because I didn't change any code yet. Okay, let's do PHP artisan test. I got an error here. And it failed because the row already exists 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you look at where it's filling, it's line 72, which is what we expect. Okay, let's look what happened here because I got a failure I didn't expect, but it's because I wrote a test case that's bad. Cut and paste bug. I took down here where the price is 0. 0 is not a valid price. So when I did this assert database has, it didn't work because actually it failed the validation. So that's the issue here, is that it really didn't do this, didn't succeed because price can't be 0. So let's just make it something positive like 1. Let's try again, see if we get further. Okay, here, expect status code 4, but got a 201, which makes sense because I wrote the test case assuming it should fail, but we haven't added the actual validation to enforce uniqueness on the model number. So this tells me I got to now add the code to make the test pass. So I go to the product controller, and we'll go to model number unique, and then the table name is products, and the column is model number. And we don't need the except. Looks good. Let's go down and run the test again. Now they all passed. Going back to our requirements, we fulfill this one as well now. And that's how you go. You just keep going like this and adding your test, and this way you're safe. So in the next lesson, we'll look to refactor this, and we'll break test cases and then get them to pass again. So we'll look at how to do that as well as additional types of validations. So thank you so much, and hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, reach out to me. I will make the source code for this available for you as well. Thanks.